Ffarquhar represents the main terminus of Thomas the Tank Engine's Branchline in the island of Sodor. The line is still worked by Thomas. This is push-pull coaches only in Talyllyn, while Percy works the goods train. The timetable is quite intensive, for this branch shows no signs of losing its traffic to road competitors.
Everyone at some point has come across Thomas the Tank Engine. Whether you're a fan or not, it's hard to deny that the stories have made a huge impact in the railway world. These days, Thomas and Friends is a global phenomenon, loved by many around the world. But before the various TV shows and the Day Out with Thomas events, it all started here with the original stories written 80 years ago by the Reverend Wilbert Awdry. This was my first introduction to Thomas and the Railway series. In fact, this is the very book I had as a kid, and my parents used to read me a few of the stories every night before bed. But Awdry didn't just write stories about talking trains though. That may have been how it started, but he was always very clear that the railway side of things should be realistic. From the types of engines to the different lines and railways, eventually he created an entire world for the island of Sodor. And Sodor didn't just exist within the pages of these books. The Reverend was also a keen railway modeller, and throughout his life he built various layouts depicting the locations that he had written about. So with this year marking the 80th anniversary of the first book being published, I thought, why not follow in his footsteps? Why not recreate part of the world Awdry set out in the Railway series? Awdry's most famous layout was the Ffarquhar Branch Mark II, which depicted the final station on Thomas's Branchline. The actual layout is still in existence, preserved by the Talyllyn Railway and restored to working order by volunteers. This second version of Ffarquhar was built in 1968, when Awdry discovered that the original layout was too big to fit in his new car. But despite it being close to 60 years old now, it's still in incredible condition and employs several innovative ideas for the time. And so over the next few months, I'll be embarking on a journey to recreate Awdry's model railway of Ffarquhar. This will be the most challenging layout I've built to date, and I'll need all the skill I've picked up over the last few years. To help me, I'll be making use of the latest techniques and innovation in the hobby, like 3D printing, laser cutting, and even block detection to allow for automatic running of trains. And all while diving into a key part of my own and many others' childhood memories. I don't just want this to be a great Thomas layout, I want this to be a great model railway regardless. The pressure is on, but what better way is there to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the Railway series than by recreating a slice of Sodor? When I decided that my next project would be a recreation of the Ffarquhar branch, I immediately got in contact with the Talyllyn Railway and Luke Ryan, who is a well-known expert on the Railway series and basically all things Awdry. They were very kindly able to send me a lot of the Reverend's original notes and diagrams for the layout, which really helped with my own planning. You can see here all of his original annotations on the plan, which show the function of each of the sidings and positions of the scenic elements like the water tank, the station buildings, and even the concealed set of sidings round the back. But I do want to make it clear that my intention here isn't to simply replicate his layout like for like. After all, the original still exists and is in working order, so it's not like I'd be bringing something back that was previously lost. No, instead I want to put my own spin on things and also make use of all the modern technologies and advancements we have in the hobby today. Awdry's layout was pretty cutting edge for the time. It featured motorised points, automatic uncoupling on his locos and rolling stock, even working semaphore signals. So it's reasonable to suggest that were Awdry building the layout today, that he would make use of all the fantastic innovations we now have available. And so that's what I'm planning to do as well. I'll be using things like Pico's finescale bullhead track for the very first time. I'll employ the use of 3D printing and laser cutting to create items which previously would have been made in more traditional ways. I'll even be wiring up the whole layout for block detection, allowing me to fully automate Ffarquhar for running at exhibitions. And like I said earlier, I don't just want to completely copy the original plan, I do want to make some alterations and make it my own. Looking at the original plan, the main scenic section is made up of 2 baseboards that are joined together. For my version of Ffarquhar though, I'm going to split this section across 3 baseboards totaling 8 foot in length. My boards will also be slightly shallower, and this along with the large size of the bullhead points does mean that I'm going to have to adapt the track plan slightly. So along the back we have the hidden siding, which is supposed to represent the line up to the quarry where Toby and Mavis work. Instead of having 2 hidden sidings forming a run-round loop, I've gone for a single length of hidden track here, which will let me utilise more space out front. I've also changed the order of the points that lead into this siding too, with the run-round loop for the station having been extended to encompass this spur off to the quarry. Hi, sorry, just a quick interruption as a bit of a side note. Normally I would have loved to have used a 3-way point here for this little section, but unfortunately, Pico are taking their sweet time in producing one for the bullhead range, so yeah. Anyway, carry on. Because of this, I've removed the oil depot siding for Daisy and Mavis. I figured either there would be a fuel point for them up by the sheds, which are also intended to be along that hidden line, or I can try and squeeze something in down by the loco lay-by siding instead. Additionally, I won't be including the cattle dock on my version of Ffarquhar either. I feel like there's enough going on at the front of the layout already, and I prefer to take a less is more approach, so I'll be spreading out some of the other features to try and give everything a bit more space. The other major change is up by the tunnel. Now this straight version of Ffarquhar is how Awdry had the layout set up at home, with trains running into the tunnel and straight into the fiddle yard. However, at exhibitions he did extend the layout round a corner in order to give them a longer run, and in fact this is still how the layout is displayed at exhibitions today. This setup includes a level crossing, and I really wanted to include this on my version as I've always wanted to have a go at making a working crossing. I'll then put 2 buildings either side of the line to act as a scenic break for the layout, and I'll be making this layout compatible with the fiddle yard from my modular model railway so that I can reuse that. Of course, by making it compatible with the fiddle yard, that does mean that this layout will eventually be compatible with my entire modular model railway, which certainly opens up some interesting opportunities for the future. But I don't want to get you all overexcited, that is a long way off yet. So there's a few small changes that I'll be making, but hopefully the layout will still feel like Ffarquhar overall. With the plan in place though, it's time to start work, and before I can lay any track or scenics, I need a baseboard. I've shown how to build baseboards on the channel a few times already using traditional woodworking methods, but nowadays there's a more modern alternative available thanks to laser cutting. Of course, the easiest route is to buy a pre-made kit, which are designed to simply slot together using PVA glue. But I like a bit of a challenge, and since I have a laser cutter, I figured why not make my own? So I fired up the machine and started cutting out all the pieces I'd need for my baseboards. For this project I'm using 9mm plywood, which is the thickest material I've ever tried to cut. Thankfully, the powerful 40-watt laser managed to slice through the material in just a single pass, and the cuts are much cleaner and more accurate than they would be if I was doing this by hand with a saw. So just to explain what was going on there, as you'll have noticed, I'm not using the laser cutter's enclosure for this job, and that's because the plywood sheets are longer than the laser cutter itself, so the cover wouldn't go on top. But if the material is too big for the machine, how am I going to cut the full length of each board? Well, once I've cut one end, I can just slide the wood through to cut the other end. You can see these target marks, which I use to make sure the laser is perfectly lined up for the second half of the cut. That way I can seamlessly continue the design and cut pieces that are actually bigger than the laser's working area. For the ends, I've included holes and guide marks to help line up each baseboard. This is similar to what I did for the end plates on my modular model railway a few years ago, and the knowledge I gained from that project has really come in handy here. With one board now cut, I need to start work on the next one. I'll actually be making 3 of these in total, and they all need to be completely identical. In the meantime though, I can start assembling the first baseboard. Putting these together is actually nice and straightforward. All I'll need is some PVA glue to hold the sides together. So brush in hand, it's time to get building. Now each baseboard is essentially an open box flipped upside down. The sides all have slots and tabs cut into them, so I just apply a bit of glue to these areas and then fit them together. This process is then repeated for the other side. Next, the ends go on. This part is a little bit trickier since I have to line up both the top and the sides at the same time. I've also cut an extra backing piece for the ends. This will just give me a bit more depth and support for the alignment dowels that I'll be fitting in a moment. While the glue dries, I want to keep everything nice and square, so I've got some right angled clamps here which I can use on each corner. With a laser cut piece like this, it's already set up to be square, but the clamps will just make sure that there's no movement while drying. And again, I can repeat the process at the other end. And just like that, one baseboard is done and ready to go. Laser cut baseboards are a surprisingly fast way to produce multiple units in one go. For reference, I cut all 3 boards in a single afternoon, and each one takes around 15 minutes to assemble. Of course, I still need a way to join the boards accurately so that the track lines up each time that they're put together. For this, I'm using bullet dowels, and you can see a pair here includes a bullet and a socket. As I mentioned before, I've already cut matching holes for these into the ends of each board. The socket fits in one side, and then I'll fit the bullet into the other. And then it's just a case of repeating the process for the next board along. The crucial part is to make sure that the dowels match up in the same way so that you don't have 2 sockets or 2 bullets trying to interfere with each other. So with 2 boards now ready to go, let's see if they join up correctly. And there we go, they've slotted together perfectly with the dowels keeping everything aligned. And looking at the surface, we can see these guides on top line up perfectly as well. So with the baseboards built, I can now start thinking about laying some track. Now when it comes to laying track, Pico really are the best in the business. For my previous layouts, I've used their Code 100 track, which is their fairly standard, most popular style of track. For Ffarquhar though, I want to try something a bit different, go for something a little more fine scale. And so for this project, I'm going to use their bullhead track range, which is going to be a completely new experience for me. I have to admit that this looks a lot more realistic. The sleeper spacing more accurately matches what we have here in the UK. And of course, we've got that nice rail profile as well. Now, all the track for this layout was bought from D-Rails, who are the main sponsor for this series. And if after watching this video you want to try building a layout with bullhead track too, you can head over to their website drails.co.uk to check out the range. And not only that, but D-Rails are currently running a special offer on the bullhead points just for you guys. This is a return of their popular 369 deal which they ran last year, where you get bigger discounts the more points you buy. So if you're building a layout that has a lot of points and turnouts, this deal will definitely help you save your wallet a bit if you're needing to get a bunch of them in one go. It was a really popular deal last year when they ran it. I think I mentioned it in one of my TT120 videos and loads of you made use of the deal. So yeah, don't miss out because this offer won't be available forever. If you're looking to build a layout using some bullhead track, then I'd really recommend checking drails.co.uk and making use of this deal while you can. But yeah, if Awdry were around today, I think he'd probably want to use the bullhead track too. He obviously had to make do with what was available at the time, but now we have so many different options in the hobby to fit all kinds of layout, and for me this track does feel like the best fit. While the track is a fairly crucial part of any model railway, there's actually a lot of stuff that is required for building any kind of layout. Now these are just some of the supplies that I'll be using throughout the build, and while we won't be using all of this straight away, it does show how many different elements go into creating a scene. From glues and paints to electrics and even building kits, this hobby is a really nice mix of several different disciplines all smashed together. I've also now put the 3 baseboards together with the bullhead track laid out roughly in position. This is actually the first time I've seen the full track plan in front of me in a physical space, so I can get a good idea of how the layout will look. You'll notice I've also started placing some of the buildings, or in some instances markers of the same size, to make sure that everything fits the space nicely. I'll start off the actual track laying process with a single baseboard, the one at the right hand end of the layout with the head shunt and the goods platform. As always, I'm going to lay my track on a cork bed instead of putting it directly on the baseboard. For this layout, I'm actually using copy decks to stick the cork down. It's a new method for me. I normally just use PVA, but as I'm planning to use copy decks to hold the track down, I figured I might as well use it here too. Unlike PVA, it's got a decent grip to it and holds the cork down to the baseboard really well. Laying the track on a cork bed will help support it, but more importantly when I put down the ballast it'll give it a nice realistic shoulder. Some people say that using cork dampens the sound when running trains, and that is true, although the effect is minimal once you get the scenics down as the vibrations simply pass through the hard ballast to the wood. And others claim that you don't need to use cork at all, that you can lay your track directly onto the baseboard, which is also absolutely true. Like many things in model railways, it's entirely optional, and for me, I'm mainly doing it to get the aesthetic of the shoulder where the ballast falls away from the track. Now I'm using a roll of cork which is pre-cut to match the width of the track, and it's much easier to work with than using a big sheet of cork. For anyone wondering, it's 3mm thick, and there are links in the description to this and everything else shown in the episode. With the cork down and the copy decks holding it in place nicely, I get the points in position. This is so I can mark out where I need to drill holes for the point motors. I do find a lot of the skill in building a model railway is keeping all your plans in mind so you don't make things too difficult for yourself later on. For example, it would be impossible to drill these holes after the points have been laid, at least not without doing some damage to them. As the bullhead turnouts are uni-frog points, there's also a feed wire to switch the frog polarity, so I'll need to drill some smaller holes for these too. Next, it's time to put down some double-sided tape. This is a technique I first used on Teton, the TT120 layout I built last year, and it's a really great way to stick down points and make ballasting a lot easier later on. I use a craft knife to reopen the holes for the motor, just so that the wire can pass through easily, and then the points are fitted in position. With all that done, the points are ready to be installed. There's a little bit of maneuvering to get everything lined up correctly, but once the points are down, the tape holds onto them really well. Next, I need to cut a section of bullhead track to the correct length for the sections I'm working on. You can see the Code 75 bullhead rail is a bit more delicate, and it tends to shift and bend when using the Dremel on it. When I'm not filming, usually I use an offcut of wood over the top to hold it steady, but track cutters are also a viable option too. Once again, Copydex is applied to the cork, which I'll be using to hold down the track. The first line goes down, and this will form the head shunt for the station. This is swiftly followed by the second line beside it, which will make up the good stock. And I'm not using track pins or tacks at all here, I'm just relying on the Copydex, which is doing a great job, and I actually love how quickly this dries. So with the track down on this board, I'm going to move on to painting the sides of the rails on the points. I use rail match sleeper grime for this, and eventually all of the track will get a coating. Right now though, I'm just doing the points, and that's because the double-sided tape is still exposed. I want to get this area ballasted quickly before the tape loses its stick, and it's much easier to paint these rails before the ballast goes down. So a quick covering with the fine paintbrush dulls down the sides of these rails rather nicely. For the rest of the track, I'll most likely use the spray version of this paint, but I always do the points with the brush so that it doesn't go into the mechanism or anywhere it isn't supposed to. Ballasting these points is then a really quick and easy job thanks to that double-sided tape. I can simply drop loose ballast over the points, and the layers that settle on the tape will be stuck in place. I'm using the light grey granite from True to Scale for this layout, and you'll be seeing a lot more of their fantastic products throughout this build as I get stuck in with the scenics. With the points fully ballasted, the excess can then be hoovered up using a small desk vacuum. All the loose ballast gets sucked up for reuse, but the bottom layer sitting on the tape stays stuck down. And this makes it a really quick way to get neatly ballasted points without having to worry about using glue near any of the moving parts. So I've got the track laid on one board, but now I need to bridge the gap to the next section. And the biggest challenge here is keeping all of the track aligned so that it lines up correctly when the baseboards are taken apart and then put back together again. I have done videos on this in the past, and obviously I learnt a lot from building Pitley, my modular model railway. And on that I soldered the rails to brass screws that were embedded into the baseboard. That anchored them in position, and it's a really simple but effective way of doing things. This time though, I want to do something a bit better, and that's where Model Tech come in with their Pro Track aligners. Now essentially these are a set of sleepers that you can solder rails to the top of. The clever bit though is that they come in two sections which fit neatly together to create a seamless join. The idea being that they lock together, making sure that the rails are always aligned. And that is absolutely perfect for what I need here. Now Model Tech were actually kind enough to send over a few of their different products. In addition to the aligners, there's also the power feeder sleepers and also rail isolating sections as well, both of which I'll be making use of today. And of course these are available for multiple scales and gauges, so if you like the look of them, you can see the full range on their website modeltech.uk. I'll put a link to them down in the description too if you want more info. But yeah, they've got a great range covering everything from the popular gauges like 00 and N to even niche scales such as HOM and even Z scale. For the aligners in particular, there are even specifically designed ones to work with the bullhead track that I'm using, and that's really handy because it means I'll be able to keep the sleeper spacing on the layout nice and consistent. Here's the second board connected to the first one, and this will help me line everything up initially before I get the track in place. The cork strip is then laid for the track that runs alongside the platform, following the same angle from the previous board. The same is also done for the loop line as well. Of course, both these lines run off the end of the baseboard, and what I like to do is cut the cork strip a little long here. I can then use a knife to trim off the excess, making sure it's flush with the end of the board. Now these are the Model Tech power feeder sleepers that I was just talking about, and I can use these to bring power to my track. They do have to be separated from each other first though, and I've found the quickest way to do this is using the Dremel. To prepare them for the layout, I add a bit of solder to the pads on top. And you'll notice I'm using a helping hand here to keep the sleeper steady while I work on it. I also opt to attach the feeder wires at this stage too. There are little solder connections for these where the wires pass up through the sleeper before being soldered together. Sticking to convention, I'm using red and black wires for my track wiring. At this point, I've also decided where the power feeds will be positioned on the layout, and so I need to drill 2 holes, one for each wire. The wires can then be inserted as the sleeper is moved into position. A bit more Copydex is used, and the sleeper can be stuck down. Eventually the track will rest on top of this like a normal sleeper, and I'll solder the rails to those pads on top. This creates a really solid electrical connection and will be pretty much invisible once blended in with the rest of the track. With the feeders in place, I can now turn my attention to the aligners, adding some solder along the top to prep them for securing the rails. The 2 halves are then glued down, bridging the joint between the baseboards. I'm also going to use some Model Tech isolated sleepers on the layout as well. I'll cover this more in a later episode, but to automate Ffarquhar I need to separate the track into different sections for block detection. In most cases this happens on the split of a baseboard or after a point, but in a few instances I do need separate blocks along a single piece of track, so these sleepers will lock the rail in place after it's been cut. So now I can get the track back in place, and a long length of this is laid directly over the baseboard joint. For the second line I've added a smaller section to bridge the gap across the joint, although this will run to a point fairly soon afterwards. You'll notice I've trimmed away the sleepers in some areas so that the rail sits down flat on the aligners. The rails are now resting on top of the feeder sleepers as well, and so these can be soldered to the pads underneath. This not only helps hold the track in position, but it's a really easy and covert way to power the rails once the wires underneath are connected up. The rails sitting on the aligners are also soldered down too. And it's crucial at this point that I'm happy with the track and that everything is nice and smooth, as once I cut the rail, ideally I don't want to be fiddling around with this. So with the track secured, I grab the Dremel and cut through each rail to separate the boards cleanly. Because the rail is soldered to the aligner, it creates a really solid anchor so that nothing moves. And in theory, with the baseboard dowels and the ProTrack aligners working together, everything should line up perfectly. So let's put it to the test. The 2 boards separate nicely, and so far so good. And then as they go back together again, the rails match up perfectly just as they did before, which is fantastic. This is very satisfying though. No matter how many times I do it, the result is a nice smooth joint. And just to prove it, you can see rolling stock crosses over effortlessly with no bumps or snags. So with that joint complete, I can carry on with laying the rest of the track for Ffarquhar. The next section includes 2 sidings off the main loop, and again the first step is getting the cork down. With more points in this area, the holes are marked out for the motors. The holes are then drilled through the surface of the baseboard. And double-sided tape is laid down over the cork. And then the points are fitted in position. As before, ballast is applied directly over the points, falling into the gaps between the sleepers and sticking to the tape. And when I get round to ballasting the rest of the layout, I may well come back and add a bit more here to build up the height to the top of the sleepers. But this works really well for getting an initial base layer down without needing to worry about glue. Now, the second track joint across to the final baseboard is a lot more complex, with 5 separate tracks crossing over. And here as the cork is laid out, you can see how the points converge the main loop back down to a single line. Now that I know the position of this final point, the cork bed for the hidden siding at the back of the layout can be laid as well. With more copy decks laid down, a Pro Track aligner is glued into position for every track crossing over the joint. And feeder sleepers are again added where power is needed. I've also included another isolating section for the hidden siding so that I can store multiple locos and trains in this section. With the groundwork done, the double-sided tape goes down again and a large section of track is moved into place. This section in particular forms the station throat, and it's really satisfying to see the track plan taking shape. I weigh everything down to hold it in place while the glue sets, before turning my attention to the sidings. In comparison to the previous section, these are a lot more simple, and once the copy decks is down, the track is pressed into place. Now, one nice feature of the bullhead track that I haven't mentioned yet is the fish plates. These are absolutely tiny, but the detail is incredible, and they're much more realistic than what you'd normally find on Pico's standard track. I did also find that the Model Tech grabber tool was really helpful for picking them up, and once they're fitted onto the rails, you can appreciate how much detail these add to the track, even if it's unlikely to be noticed by most people. Just like before, the rails are soldered to the aligners one by one to anchor them in position. And the same is done for all the power feeders as well. The final piece of track to go down is the long storage siding that runs down the back of the layout. For Ffarquhar, this is the line that heads off to the sheds and the quarry, but for the layout it'll actually be used for hiding locos behind a small back seam. So with all the track now in position, I'm free to cut all these rails that cross over the baseboard. As before, the Dremel is the perfect tool for this. The gooseneck attachment makes it even easier, allowing me to get much closer to the rail for a cleaner and more accurate cut. With all the rails separated, I can do the rolling stock test again, and thankfully all the joints are still nice and smooth. So that is pretty much all the track laid on Ffarquhar, and with the 3 modules set up together we can really see how the layout will take shape. The only section of track not installed currently is the single line leading into the station, and that's because this will eventually feature a level crossing. However, I do now have the buildings that will go either side of the line to form the scenic break. Many of these 3D printed buildings are from MS models, and you'll definitely be seeing more of these as the build progresses. And there's also a few specific Railway Series themed buildings from Buggles Kelly Station too. At the moment, none of the positions for these buildings are set in stone. I'm really just playing around to see what works best, especially with regards to viewing points across the front of the layout. But with the baseboards built and the track laid, I've made a huge amount of progress today, so that is going to be it for this first episode. If you want to keep up to date with the project, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and that way you'll know when the next part is available. And if you just can't wait to see what happens next, you can become a channel member to watch the next episode right now. And here's a little teaser of what to expect. I wire up the layout, motorise the points, and dive headfirst into the world of DCC automation.